This is a webinar on innovation's holy grail, measuring what matters for success. And so there's this misalignment often between what leadership think is important and perhaps what we as corporate innovators think is important. There's not necessarily a common language there. And I'm hoping with this new emerging standards for innovation, this 56,000 suite of standards, we should get some improvements on that over time. But right now we are where we are. So let's look at this misalignment in a bit more detail. Now, as innovators, we know innovation takes time. And so sometimes the timeline isn't always predictable. We're not entirely sure exactly when we're going to be able to get there. It doesn't run necessarily like a normal project. Sometimes we're not necessarily clear about what direction leadership really wants me to take, and they might not know themselves. And so that can lead to disparate types of innovation work happening in different parts of the business. I think as innovators, we always want to focus on the things that make a real difference, and that means working on meaningful, impactful things. However, leadership look at things like results. When can I see those results? What expectations should I have for new things? There is a mismatch between how we do financial measures in an organization and the innovation journey. And I can give you a book recommendation a little bit later to dig into that topic specifically. Now, as an innovator, our journey is kind of interesting. We know that leadership ultimately care about money or impact. So perhaps if we're working in a hospital, we might be thinking about patient experience. We might be thinking about reducing infections. We're thinking about impact. In commercial organizations, we usually think about money. We're thinking about profit. We're thinking about revenue. We know that's what leadership care about. Now, to get there, we need to implement new things to deliver those results. So we know it's not useful to work on things that aren't going to get really implemented. We need to know that we're working on things the business believes in. To get there, what we need is a high quality portfolio of new things. So that means we know that not everything is successful, of course, but we need that diversity of activity to deliver an implementation. Maybe if I work in pharmaceuticals, I might have, say, 7 major new drugs that I'm looking at a time, and I hope that one of them comes off. My ratio of implementation is maybe 7-1. In consumer goods, it might be a little bit better than that, but not everything that we work on is successful. We have to accept that. Innovation is a portfolio of choices. Now, to deliver that high quality portfolio, we also need to think about what new ideas or new solutions do we need to create. And to get there, we need to be focusing on looking in the right places. Because if we're not focused on the areas that the business is prepared to execute, we're likely to go off track at some point. Now, this is our world as innovators. This is the journey that we are focused on. Now, I mentioned a book recommendation. This is a good one. It's around innovation accounting. It says exactly what it is on the tin, a practical guide for measuring your innovation ecosystem's performance. And it looks at these different elements. Now, what you will see from taking a look at this is some really fascinating observations that might help with your conversation with leadership, because financial accounting doesn't really help align both the searching for new growth options as well as executing the existing business models. It's very much focused on the execution path. But the reality is the pace of change is so quick now that unless we protect the future of our organization, the role for innovators, we are going to struggle at a certain point in time. And history is littered with organizations that weren't looking further out than just what's in front of their nose. What we also see is financial accounting doesn't help measure the phases an asset passes through as it's converted into money. The value of something from an idea through to implementation, it changes. But how do we measure that? I think it's really interesting. Some organizations have done an IP audit, and they've looked at all of the different IP that they have in the organization and said, some of this stuff we're never going to commercialize. So actually, we're going to license it out or we're going to sell it on. It's pointless sitting on a shelf. Let's try and convert it into money. The final point I want to make here is that financial accounting really doesn't effectively cover the innovation process and the commercial imperative, that innovation imperative I talked about before. Is how urgently do we need to change that portfolio of things that we do in order to protect the future of our business? So as I said, take a read of this. It will help, I think, start to introduce this language that I think is very helpful when it comes to talking to leadership about what they should measure. But these are the big themes that I'm sort of seeing here. So you've got the engagement and behavioral type measures. This is the number of people getting involved, the levels of collaboration, the number of different types of innovation conversation you're having, the breadth of the innovation topics that we see, and maybe training and competency building. I like that as a sort of set of categories. In terms of the portfolio or those throughput measures, forecast value over time, that came up in that in the idea shared earlier. Percentage risk across the portfolio. This is something not enough organizations do. So when we look at a new concept we're working on, let's also think about how confident are we that we can deliver that forecast. Now, maybe it's unfair to have the person that's working on it make that prediction. Maybe that biases the process. Have a think about maybe having an innovation committee that looks at maybe 10, 20, a portfolio of concepts and makes an independent assessment on that likelihood or that risk associated with that investment. That might be a better way of thinking about it. And I like to have that feeling of not everything is perfect, not everything is going to be successful, but if we have a chance to judge likelihood and we combine that with the level of impact we're expecting, it makes it much easier for us to make portfolio decisions on what we've got. A breakdown of our portfolio value by time horizon and what's going to impact us short term, medium term, and longer term. Ideally, we want to have a weighted view of that. Again, on the next slide, I'm going to talk a bit more about that idea of a balanced portfolio in a second. The percentage change since we last measured something. Are we getting better? Is the value of the portfolio increasing? Is it decreasing? Is the risk increasing or decreasing? These things are interesting. These things help tell us whether we've got the right balance in that portfolio, whether we're getting better at innovation, of course. And then finally, the portfolio measures, which I think we understand, is primarily going to be financial or impact. So how do we demonstrate our journey to leadership? We talked about what we know as that important 5-step process, but we need to be able to express that to leadership in a way which makes sense to them. Now, we know that what they care about is the amount of money we're making or the amount of impact we're creating by a particular date. And to get that, we need to understand what we're going to be implementing and when. We need some kind of forecast that flows from our portfolio of capability. We've got 20 maybe new things with different magnitudes that are likely to be implemented over this particular time horizon. So if we've got good data, we can actually create a picture, especially weighted against our confidence level, to say this is what we're expecting in terms of impact or money over time based upon our best judgment. And this, again, if it's orientated towards an independent assessment on risk or likelihood, that's even better. So leadership can see, okay, we know what impact we're expecting from existing portfolio of things, and now we can see what impact we're expecting from our innovation team over time. And that combination of two, that gives us a forecast and tells us whether we're likely to hit our targets or not, or whether we might need to change that mix.